Fun. Okay, well, I'll kick us off and then I will hand it to our hosts for the rest of the webinar. My name is Brittany Petrilli. I'm with the Texas Association of Museums. We are one of the largest statewide museum associations in the country, and we love helping our members with everything from professional development to advocating for the field. And our business members are here with us today, CatalogIt, and we also have Todd at PrimeSite Web. And we also have one of our members at the McFaddin-Ward House Museum. So I'm going to kick it off to them to introduce themselves. I will keep letting people in, but we're excited to hear what y'all have to share today.
Thank you. I'm Todd with PrimeSite Web Solutions, and we're here with Dan from CatalogIt and Victoria from McFaddin-Ward House. We were supposed to be joined by Rayanna Heft. She's my wife. She's having a family emergency right now. So I was tasked with going through the materials. We kind of worked on the slideshow together, so it made it a little easier. But I'll go through what she wanted to tell everybody as far as her planning and execution of the virtual tours and digital tools while she was at McFaddin-Ward House. What we will do first is, again, welcome everybody. What we'd like to do is just go through some of these objectives for the webinar. We're going to kind of talk about the project management processes implemented by McFaddin-Ward House Museum team to execute digital initiatives effectively. Discuss best practices for integrating digital tools and platforms into cultural heritage education efforts, balancing traditional methods with innovative approaches for audience engagement. Identify potential opportunities for collaboration and knowledge sharing among cultural institutions, seeking to enhance their outreach efforts through digital means, inspired by the experiences at the McFaddin-Ward Museum, and gain insight into the digital tools and platforms utilized by the museum for various projects, including their selection criteria, implementation strategies, and outcomes. So again, the digital projects that we're talking about today were originally created for the McFaddin-Ward House in 2021 during the COVID crisis. However, they were used extensively when the museum was closed for a massive electrical project that lasted about a year in 2022. Now, this on the slide here you see is the McFaddin-Ward House in Beaumont, Texas. It's a Beaux Arts colonial, was built in 1905 to 1906 and was occupied by a prominent Southeast Texas family for almost 8 decades. The house is on the left and the carriage house is on the right. The interpretation at the McFaddin-Ward House centers on the home's occupants, the McFaddin-Ward family and their staff, who lived and worked in both the house and the carriage house from 1906 until the last occupant's death in the 1980s. This narrative focuses on the time period between 1906 and 1950, so kind of mid-20th century. Our goal was to bring everyone's lived experiences into the big house, as it's called, and into the digital experiences, thus giving the visitors a broader lens from which to consider history. The challenge for Rayanna as the educator at the time was to connect a great deal of information to the visitor through digital options. So the project management process started with discussions about the reasons behind incorporating digital tools. The staff had to define their why. And as you may be able to see on the slide here, we have the whys, the mandates, and the options. They also had to determine what they wanted out of the desired platforms and the project options. Much of the project management overlapped for these various projects. Options highlighted in red on our options column are the projects that were ultimately undertook and completed. Today, the presentation that we're presenting with you today focuses on connecting collections to the virtual tour, the mobile app, and the possibility of better connecting to the website. On the next slide, let's see. Collaboration was a multiple-step process that started with internal conversations. Our advice to anyone considering digital outreach is to consider the team's bandwidth and how these types of projects can meet the mission and serve visitor engagement efforts. Brianna engaged in deep conversation with Victoria and the executive director, and together they produced a plan of what involvement looked like from the collections department. For example, she ended up needing multiple objects photographed and digitized, some of which were on exhibit in the main house, which meant the collections team had to build that into their work days. This was a project that Victoria already had on her radar. Now, Rayanna didn't start the research process for companies until she knew that the whole team was open-minded to working on the projects. And since they wanted to work smarter, not harder, they needed the CMS or collection management system, CatalogIt, to automatically connect to as many platforms as possible so Victoria and the rest of the staff wouldn't have to manually upload images and enter object information, especially for the virtual tour platform. When they decided on the company of choice, after a great deal of price comparison and research, additional collaboration was required between myself, Todd Hoeft at PrimeSite Web Solutions, and Dan Rael with CatalogIt. So people are often curious about how Rayanna handled her project management organization. She went super low tech using Google Docs that they could all share and edit as a team remotely in the office. She started all projects with this framework you see on the screen as a planning guide. Here's where they noted their strategies, the connection to TEEX for the fourth grade tour, who would manage what part of the project, things along those lines. On the next slide, the narrative for each space of the house was noted in a simple Google Doc with the chosen object highlights, video ideas, sound clips, etc. Everything was written down, which made transferring the copy to the virtual tour system super easy. It was just a cut and paste. All the research and composition was completed while the platform was still in development. Now, museum professionals know the importance of incorporating object-based learning experience as a path towards sensory engagement. There are multiple benefits associated with using objects to teach history and tell stories. First of all, OBL is a form of multimodal teaching. Objects-based learning enhances memory, stimulates creativity, promotes empathy. And McFaddin-Ward House offered object analysis and touch experiences for in-person field trips. So when students first arrived, they would encourage them to choose an artifact related to a certain topic or theme, and then they would complete an artifact analysis worksheet. Rayanna was inspired by the Bullock Museum for their innovative worksheet in this activity. Throughout the house and the carriage tour, the docents and the staff intentionally pointed out various objects related to the chosen themes. For example, if they wanted to highlight innovation, they would point out objects related to communication technology, which we'll talk about it in the future here. They also offer touch tables throughout the house where students learn how certain objects were used in various spaces. Emulating these types of experiences was the biggest challenge when creating a virtual field trip experience and required a great deal of support from the collections team. And now I'll turn it over to Victoria to talk a little bit about the collections and processes.
Thank you, Todd. So here I'm going to speak from the collections perspective of this whole process and how we decided to approach the inclusion of collections objects in the visitor system and what that looked like for us. So our processes included looking at themes, objects, and our CMS CatalogIt. These three aspects helped us in our work in including collections objects to the virtual tour. So to create the themes, which Rayanna actually created these themes I will talk about, we had to look at our history and our collections. The McFaddin-Ward House is a historic house museum, and we hold about 34,000 objects. Basically, every object we have in collections was once owned by the family. I'll say basically because we do have a couple props in there, but most everything was originally owned by the family. We are also not a collecting institution, so we work with the objects that we have. The objects range from about the 1890s to the 1980s, with the interpretation of the house only spanning the early 1900s to the 1950s. Even during such a small time frame, we still have a great deal to work with for interpretation and different types of tours, which is where the theme tours, mainly based for educational engagement, come into play. So theme creation centered on various ideas that melded and worked well with the museum's overall historical context and the objects found in the collection. Rayanna, previously in charge of interpretation, came up with theme ideas and bounced them around with a curatorial staff to create versatile and long-lasting themes for the virtual tour. Collaboration is vital throughout this whole process in order to make sure everyone's on the same page, and it creates an idea checks and balances to see what could work, what might only work a little bit and what actually will work. The tours based off of these themes could be used for a variety of purposes, including engagement. Here we have a series of themed tours based on history and collections, such as the labor movement in textile work, transportation changes over time, and changing beauty norms. So included in the virtual tour itself, there's also a general audience tour that includes most of the currently uploaded objects. So once we had the general theme ideas, we then moved on to thinking about which objects would be included in these tours. So the part of the process involving objects could be broken down into smaller pieces, beginning with selection, then photography, digitization, review, and publishing. There are also more general pieces that we kind of went through, since there are always little snafus you run into when you're first, working with something, and some trial and error, but we eventually found a way that worked very well for us. Let's take a look at selection. So for this virtual tour experience, a series of objects were selected based off of a number of different aspects. First, whether they fit certain themes or tours that could be used for our engagement purposes. Certain objects work better for our current educational engagement tours, such as our Annunciator box or our telephones. Second, how recognizable the objects would be based on a house tour. There are certain objects that stand out during the house tour that we wanted to make sure that we included in the virtual tour. Third, professional opinions. So curatorial staff members, Rayanna as our previous education director, our executive director, Tony Chavot, and our historian all had input in which items would be included in this current virtual tour. Fourth, based off of a poll done within our docent pool on their favorite objects or those that they thought people seemed the most interested in. So our docents handled the day-to-day tours, so we were able to provide a differing perspective on which objects people tended to ask more questions about or ones that they seemed more interested in. Once the objects were selected, we created a list and began by going through our CatalogIt system to see which items would need to be edited, photographed, or added into our system. We are currently working on digitizing all of our object information, so we had to go through the system to find out which objects would need whatever they needed. Once we had our list, we decided to start with the objects that needed photographs, since that process would be what was going to take the most time for us to complete. Once the objects were selected, we began photographing the ones that needed photographs. These tended to be the objects that were actually attached to the house or rather difficult for us to move. This portion was the most time-consuming due to lighting issues and trying to avoid group tours. As you can see in the photographs, the lighting is a little off. It is very dark on our third floor, but we tried our best to at least capture what the object is. So all the objects on this slide are actually from the third floor. So the first photo is of an interphone. The second is of possibly a silver closet we have. And the last one is an occupied vacant bathroom door lock. The interphone and door locks are two objects that get pointed out the most by our docents on their tour because of their kind of interesting and fun nature, just basically of what they are. So in choosing these pieces, we were working with the suggestions of our docents while also including objects that got pointed out the most during tours. So this kind of the tour staples for us. These photos were taken with a digital camera with an SD card. So they were stored on there until we moved them to a specific folder on our server to hold for when we moved into our digitization phase. So we can just complete all that we needed to complete in CatalogIt all at once. Once we had our photography all sorted out, we then moved on to our next step of digitization. As I mentioned earlier, we had created our list of objects for the tours, looked through CatalogIt to see what each needed, noted that, and then began with our most complex data entry pieces first, the ones that needed photographs. That was kind of our first review point there. Once we had our stash of photos, we moved on to the actual data entry portion. Whatever the object needed, such as a whole new entry, some edits, a photograph, we went through and completed all these aspects for it. We utilized curatorial staff as well as volunteers and docents for data entry for some shared authority and a way for us to bring them into this process. Once all the edits and entries were completed, they were reviewed by various sets of eyes to ensure that we had our information correct and we had what we needed. Once that was completed, we moved on to our final step. Our final step was even more review and publishing. The publishing step involves making a basically private collections entry into a public one, so one that is made for the eyes of the public. Not all the object information has to be published when you hit publish. That's a setting you can tinker with as you need to. We currently have about 3 online exhibits based in the CatalogIt software with published collection pieces that can be viewed by anyone who has a link to that exhibit. For the virtual tour, on our end, we needed to hit publish in CatalogIt for it to work and connect our entries to the visitor software so that while in the virtual tour, guests are able to see the object information we have from CatalogIt in the virtual tour itself. So this way we actually didn't need to retype anything. So the entries were looked over one last time, given the okay to publish, and finally were published. As you can see from the screenshot, publishing really only involved our review process and hitting publish. So through the use of the virtual tour system, we were able to provide a tour or a look inside the McFaddin-Ward House for people who might not have the ability to take a tour to the house for a number of reasons. We want as many people to be able to see the house as possible, and we want to share the information we have on the house and the objects to help people learn about the past. I can even provide an instance in which during the house closure for our electrical project, we actually had a field trip and we're not going to be able to show them the inside of the house. So instead, for part of their field trip, we actually used the virtual tour to show them the inside of the house and actually give them a closer look at some of the objects in the house. The combination of the virtual tour and CatalogIt, we've used them actually as a tool for educational engagement, research, and creating a way for the general public to visit the museum and take a closer look at objects without physically having to go. So providing a more public way for the public to see the house and view our objects helps with accountability to show what we are doing with what we have. So from a collection standpoint, that is what I have. So I will turn it back over to Todd.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. On the next slide, you'll see the end result of the general audience's tour is that visitors get a layered experience. The goal was to create an on-site experience that was easy to navigate through, interactive floor plan, as you can see on the bottom right, or direct navigation with the panel at the top left. Any of those links branch out and you can click and go to an actual room. 360 imaging for full viewing, scrollable in any direction. Text boxes in the middle for storytelling. Accessible on the McFaddin-Ward.org domain. So it is actually hosted on the same domain as your host site. And it's visible on any device, desktop or mobile, and lots of opportunities to expand accessibility. So we're using still images in this webinar to avoid bandwidth and frame rate issues. But here is an example of the incorporation of an object detail with a sound clip. So if you can see the big part of it, you've got a touch point, which is noted with a white finger icon to open the object details. That leads to the object details, as you can see there with the Victrola opened up. And then inside those object details, in this case, there is an audio file to play, which happened to be an actual recording of the Victrola, which is kind of cool. The next example is the incorporation of an object detail that had a video. So on the second floor, you talk about the marriage of the homeowners, and then there are some video shots of some of the wedding objects that were featured. The next slide shows an example of incorporation of the object detail with an oral history clip. It's just basically another audio file, but note that the icon in the top left of the first larger image is different, and that lets the visitors know that there is more history found within. In this example, the text found in the object details includes a transcript of the audio file, so that really helps with accessibility, or even still, if someone has difficulty with audio on their device. An alternate end result that was used with the same system and a lot of the same materials was a fourth grade field trip that utilized the same virtual platform, but they added the image of an actor that played the role of the matriarch, Ida McFaddin. And this character guides students through the experience using cued video. So anytime you see Ida in a room, you click on her and a video will open and she tells you a little bit about the field trip and the curriculum. And it had something to do with their service to the war efforts for both World War I and World War II. Both ladies were very deeply involved in the local Red Cross. The object theme for the fourth grade tour is how changes in communication technology, as well as access to that technology, promotes civic engagement. So connecting the virtual tour to a relevant topic such as accessing communication technology was a way to help teachers meet TEKs. Many students experienced a digital divide when learning from home during the pandemic, of course. And the tour provoked a great deal of conversation about the topic of who gets to have access based on socioeconomic factors. So there is no substitution for touch for sticky memory, of course. There's no substitution for actually being in a museum or a gallery or facility. So a Museum in a Box deliverable was also created for hands-on learning experience. This box included a timeline of technological advances such as a candlestick and rotary phone, Morse code keys, and the legend or the key for deciphering letters from those dits and dots in Morse code, copies of telegrams from the museum's archives, a science experiment for learning about circuits, and copies of postcards from the collection. So now I'll discuss things from the development perspective. At PrimeSite Web Solutions, we always love a challenge. So developing a digital tour app with the McFaddin-Ward staff was incredibly rewarding. Of course, we also saw the greater need for a web-based application like this in the industry. During planning, we came up with functions and features that we wanted in the system, such as the ability to create unlimited tours and unlimited stops that also feature unlimited objects and unlimited tasks. And we worked real close with the McFaddin-Ward staff to explain the terminologies that the system would be using while making sure that those terminologies were aligned within the museum industry. For example, using the term tour was obvious, but a point of reference in that tour we called a stop. It could be a room on the floor of the house, or when visiting the grounds outside, an area of interest such as the Rose Garden. Unlimited tours provided the infrastructure to assemble each of the floors as a separate tour, plus the gardens and carriage house as its own tour, not to mention specialty education tours such as the communication tour, and it also allows for future multi-language tours as well. So within a stop, they can feature objects. And an object is what we call a tangible item, a concept, or a topic of discussion. And also for education purposes, there are tasks that are interactive question answer features. These tasks can also be used to create like escape room type virtual experiences. We, of course, plan for audio files, video files, and images to support the visitor experience. So we knew McFaddin-Ward wanted a true virtual tour. So we incorporated 360-degree panoramic images for users to explore the spaces virtually. And this is what a panoramic image looks like when it's not processed to be used and browsed in. The next slide shows you the software that we use to process those images that would give the flexibility of looking around and scrolling around, and also the touch spots for greater detail. So going to the back end of the software, since the McFaddin-Ward staff had very specific needs, it made development easier for us at PrimeSite Web. We also wanted that kind of do-it-yourself capability to carry over into drag and drop tour order and stops order, objects and tasks. It was also important to allow one object to be used as many times as possible within any given stop in any given tour. And one of the goals of the visitor system was to avoid extra work with collections items, of course, which meant that we wanted our system to automatically pull in items from their collection engine CatalogIt. It just so happened that CatalogIt has a very robust application programming interface that let us develop a quick and easy one-click method of bringing all the items into the system that could then be dragged and dropped into any given stop. The first step to a successful CatalogIt connection is listing the CatalogIt account number in the tour system. So McFaddin-Ward has their own CatalogIt account number. That's marked in the system. From there, the link between Visitor System and CatalogIt is simple. Each item that is in CatalogIt set to web publish, just like Victoria said, is instantly imported on the single click as an individual object in the Visitor System, and it's marked with the CatalogIt item ID number. From this number, more details about the item in the collection can be used. So it's kind of like in a secondary layer to the CatalogIt data, while still allowing Visitor to provide that story layer for the object or concept. So we also created an app, and the goal was to allow people to access some of this content and data outside of the museum. This was an app that was iOS compatible. When we created the app, which is of course published through app stores, either iOS through the Apple Store or Android through Google Play, we included only the consistent, non-changing information as content and linked remotely to the virtual tour that was hosted on the web server. So that would allow McFaddin-Ward staff to continue modifying their tours as necessary or to create new tours. So with this approach, we avoided endless revisions that needed to be approved before the app is available. And currently we're in discussions with McFaddin-Ward staff to provide a web-based application that is accessible for any device and not restricted or limited by app stores and their rigorous approval processes that will be also accessible in-house through a QR code. So when visitors come to the visitor center and start their tours or their experience, they'll be able to scan a QR code and go straight to the web application. And I think that's it for most of the content that we wanted to present to everybody today. So Brittany, if you are in a position to kind of moderate some questions and answers, I think we would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, we actually have one in the chat for you right now, Todd. It is Visitor available only in the US?
Visitor is available anywhere you can host a website. So it is available outside of the US as well.
Awesome. And I put the link in the chat for some who are interested. Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and throw them out to the group. Otherwise, you can put them in the chat and we'll monitor that as well. So we have some questions coming in the chat. The first one is, how did you fund the project?
Victoria, I probably should let you speak to this since you are still with McFaddin-Ward House and you know the infrastructure of the organization.
Yes, so for the funding of the project, our whole entire museum is actually funded by an endowment. So we actually don't fundraise or do anything like that. So we just kind of ran pitched the idea to our executive director, and our executive director kind of decided how he wanted to go through a project, and there was a lot of checking on how much it would cost to make sure that we could, you know, kind of afford the project if we needed to. And once it was all approved, it just kind of all went through there. So it's just kind of the funding we already had that we kind of had to get approval from our board for.
Some budgeting. Questions about how much did this all cost? Now, granted, this software was developed originally for McFaddin-Ward House, but so when you talk about the cost, it was around $10,000, but that's not, if anybody else wants to work with either CatalogIt or Visitor, I mean, the price is incredibly reasonable. So you can reach out to us if you're interested. How long did the project take or the process take? I would say from start to finish, from inception and Rayanna getting with the staff and making sure everybody was on the same page to the actual rollout date was around 10 months. But there's a lot of working parts in there. And having to get everybody on the same page. Everybody has their own schedules. Like Victoria said, they had to, get things digitized and get get the people together to do what needs to be done on a project such as this. How many staff and volunteers worked on this, Victoria, is a question.
Oh, there's about, so my staff currently held at the time about, I'll say 3. Rayan also helped, so that was 4. And we had about 3 volunteers who really helped us, so about 7 people.
Okay, and did you all cover how long the process took start to finish?
About 10 months, yes.
Okay, beautiful.
But
yeah.
Well, I was going to say, but 10 months of that was a development. So, I mean, if anybody else is interested in this direction, then of course the development has already been done. So it would not be 10 months unless the museum needs 10 months to get the information together.
Right, right. There's another question here that someone was curious to hear more about the virtual projects you considered but didn't discuss that were reviewed in one of the earlier slides. So some like podcasts, social media, and some others.
Okay, well, actually, the podcast and social media were done. I ran, it didn't give me any notes for the ones that were not done, but the podcast, they had a series that would just take a topic and expand on it every month. And her and the Kara Timberlake, who was the marketing director at the time, published these. They did about 5 of them. They were very localized, how the McFaddin Wards engaged with their local government and society and stuff along those lines. And then as far as social media, they continue to have great social media presence and videos walking through the house and can you tell what this object is type of things, and Artifact Friday, which they've won TAM awards for, very, very comprehensive things like that.
Great. And this next question might be for you, Dan. Is CatalogIt compatible with Past Perfect? Can you link information already published in Past Perfect?
Well, yeah, Catalog is really a replacement for Past Perfect. We migrated the McFaddin-Ward House. I was just actually typing a response to another question. Somebody had asked when, how long they've been using Past Perfect. So we actually migrated McFaddin-Ward from Past Perfect probably, Victoria, I would guess it was 4.5 years ago, something like that, quite a while back. Yeah, so it doesn't link to Past Perfect. It's a replacement for Past Perfect. So we migrate quite a few accounts out of Past Perfect. We actually do it if you're using Past Perfect 4 or 5. We'll migrate you out of there for free.
Gotcha. And then there's another question in here about how much maintenance and updating in terms of the content and the tech do y'all anticipate that this project requires?
Well, I mean, different interpretations will come and go, perhaps. If they have a new tour that they want to create that focuses on a different topic, then of course they have the ability to go in and add that. They can clone stops, so they don't have to keep redoing the same thing over and over again, and they just kind of adjust it. I mentioned multi-language tours. There's the ability to clone a tour and clone stops. So you could take the same information and objects and you can just go in by hand and change it to Spanish or whatever your alternate language would need to be. So it's very it's got a lot of overhead. It's got very little overhead for you to go in and some headroom so you can go and add more tours and things along those lines.
Well, I might even continue on that thought a little bit. CatalogIt also, when you enter information in CatalogIt, and if it's into a field that's being published, it's immediately available to the API. So if you've updated some piece of language that's being published someplace, it's going to automatically publish that. You don't have to do any kind of refreshing or anything else. It's a direct contact constantly between your back end catalog system and the front end that Todd's built in this case.
Right.
Awesome. We have another question on the if there's any data on the app's uptake. Some other organizations have faced app fatigue with visitors. They're wondering how the process of creating a web-based system is different.
Well, when Rihanna pitched this to the director, Tony Chavot, he actually brought to her a virtual tour, I guess we'd say competitor. And the things that Tony himself did not like was you had to put all your data on their servers, and you had to depend on their servers to stay running. You had to pay heavy contract. You have to have a contract and the heavy yearly fees, and they didn't really feel like they owned the data. So we put together a system that, as long as your website can run PHP, which is a very common server environment, your own website, McFaddin-Ward.org actually does that as well. Then you can host this on your own, what we call a subdirectory of your site. So for McFaddin-Ward.org, it goes /tour, and that's how you get to the tour system. And we did that because we wanted clients to kind of feel like that they, held on to that information. And so if a website needs to be upscaled, or the performance of a host account needs to be upscaled, we can kind of help advise on that. But a lot of places have IT companies or host companies that can kind of get that up and running. The software itself doesn't get updated. You only pay one time. So unless we make a functional upgrade we make a functional upgrade that we make public, then you don't ever have to pay any more fees. No, there's no upgrade fees or any monthly fees, that kind of thing. So hopefully that answers the question. If we don't get to everybody's questions, feel free. Our email addresses are right here on this slide. So please reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer them.
Gotcha. We have a handful more questions if y'all are still up for them. One, which I think is a great one, is how has the project been received by the public, and what kind of feedback have you received on this?
Well, I know from the Tamez side of things, McFaddin-Ward House won a Tammy, second place, I believe, or silver for their virtual tour. So that's always a good thing. The McFaddin-Ward House clientele demographic are older visitors. So what they really wanted to do is they wanted to tap into the remote, break down the geographic barriers, types of student tours and things along those lines. So I'm not sure if they really have any hard data as to whether someone comes into the museum and uses this as a supplement, which is very possible and another advantage to it, or if it's used more. This would be more for their marketing person, Sarah Parker, question for her, but how it's actually being used. And I don't know if Victoria has the answer to that question either.
Oh, I wish I did. I can say that when we did have that field trip during our electrical project and they couldn't go in the house, the kids really seemed to enjoy it, and they really liked, picking specific things to look at. So they seemed to have a good time with it.
Mm-hmm. So closures, if you have an area of your house or site that you don't, for safety reasons, you don't allow access, you could, make this part of it. Of course, people can see it 24/7 because it's web-based. People outside of the United States can get access to it. So it's a really good option for expanding the geographic reach and outreach.
This next question is assuming that y'all at McFaddin-Ward already had photographs like the ones that you would have used in CatalogIt. Were those photos adequate for that final project, or did you have to retake some or all? Just kind of inquiring more about that process.
So on our end, unfortunately, most of the ones that actually went into the visitor system actually had to be rephotographed, because all we had were little Polaroids of them in their folders. So, but the ones that we do currently have in the system are adequate enough for us to be able to just kind of have them connect the same way.
Because the visitor system is web-based, you only need like 72 DPI on some images before to make it clear. We're not using them for print media or anything. CatalogIt may have the ability, in fact, I think they have the ability to have large images if you need to use it for research purposes or reproduction purposes and stuff. And Visitor can use those images, but you can also put an alternate smaller image in there if you need to. But like Victoria said, some of the images were just kind of very old, and the scans weren't really up to spec and things along those lines. So for their purposes, they did have to take a bunch of photos again. But every project and every tour system is a unique case. And then for most people, if you've taken photos with a digital camera or maybe a phone, those most likely will be sufficient.
Yeah, I think I might even echo that a little bit. As Todd mentioned, you can upload really any kind of image file you want to CatalogIt, but it's also CatalogIt makes it really easy just to go directly from your cell phone or your tablet to upload a picture directly into the entry. And you can take pretty good pictures anymore. You can take great pictures actually with a cell phone. And if you upload that picture to an entry and replace the image that's there, it's immediately replaced on whatever you're publishing. So it's an easy way to, to upgrade your pictures that you're publishing.
And kind of more along the specifics questions, I have two that are kind of related. One is about integrating video clips and that possibility. And then another question about could that tour be linked to another type of CMS?
As far as videos, yeah, all you have to do is have an MP4 file available that you can upload into the visitor system. It's drag and drop, and you can put it in there. And then each stop can have a video, and each object can have a video above and beyond anything that CatalogIt will bring in if it's a CatalogIt object. To go back to objects, remember we consider an object a tangible item or a concept. So you might have physical objects like in the McFaddin-Ward House, they have a shotgun in the 3rd floor. That is actually found in CatalogIt and pulled in from the CatalogIt data. And then there's an extra layer of story or information added to it on the visitor side. But there are also things like the oral history that you saw in that example on the 3rd floor. The oral history is not really a tangible item that fits within the CatalogIt infrastructure. So it is just in the visitor system as a concept where they talk about the event and have the oral history and stuff like that. And what was the other part of that question, Brittany? Oh, CMS. Oh, the CMS.
Yeah.
It's our goal to get Visitor to work with as many CMSs as our clients need. CatalogIt was an incredibly easy prospect for us to do it. McFaddin-Ward had it, and the API was very easy for us to work with. That is sometimes not very prevalent in developers when they're doing catalog management. The CatalogIt is very open to collaboration, as you can see here. So it was really good to do that. I don't know how many other CMS or collection management systems have what we would call a web API. I might need some research, but if a client comes to us and they have X for a catalog management system, collection management system, we would be happy to work with you and develop something to make it a little easier.
And of course, we're happy to migrate you over.
Yes, also that.
These next questions are for a little bit more for Victoria. One is, would you say that the project relies heavily on skills of archivists and registrars, or is this more web-based IT skills in your staff? And, another question is, how did you train new staff to get, volunteers and staff up to speed? So kind of a two-part question.
Yeah, it's a very good question too. So going off, so it's very helpful to have, when you already have the object folders, have their information in them that you're very, very sure about, and they're organized, and it's organized in a way that's kind of clear for someone who hasn't really trained in the area, for them to look through it and for them to understand it. But for this one, I think it relies more on IT skills, because if you've already had like an archivist already look at it, create the information, it's just pretty much just data entry at that point. So it should be easy to just kind of pick and put it into the system. I will say we did have a training day for a lot of our volunteers and docents. Not all of them came because they did tell a lot of us that they weren't really into the technology part of it, which we completely understood. And training, it does take a little bit longer. Staff-wise, we've been lucky that it's kind of easy. It is really kind of intuitive and easy to pick up when you kind of know which stuff that you're looking to input. And we typed out even instructions for them, tried to kind of make it as easy and painless as we could. And a more leadership staff member, which is usually me, will just kind of look over everything to make sure it's okay. And if they have any questions, they're always welcome to ask me all those questions. But I will say it's not going to be super easy to train, depending on who the kind of whoever your volunteer base is, if they're used to technology or not.
Gotcha.
That's probably true for all three of these aspects of this project. I mean, even though Visitor is super easy, drag and drop and, typing in data or copying and pasting in data and attaching images, there's still there's a little bit of a learning curve, but it's not bad. And when we have a new license, we train our license holders for free. So.
This next question is a bit of an overarching question. I know that y'all got into the specifics of this, but this is a general, how would you describe how CatalogIt, PrimeSite Web, and Visitor US integrate to complete the virtual tour? So just a high level kind of overarching picture for that question.
Well, let's see. The Visitor is the system, assuming that Visitor is the system that is presented to the visitor comes to see it. You have somebody come to your website and they're looking at your virtual tour. Well, they're going to interface with the Visitor system. So they're going to see the story level. So you walk through the house or the living history side, or you walk through the gallery, you're going to get an overarching story about the people that lived there and how they lived and the objects that they used and things along those lines. But of course, some of those objects that you're going to hear about come from the CatalogIt data. So that's going to be more granular information, like where was this manufactured? What is it made from? Who painted this painting? Things along those lines. So Visitor actually has a mode when you're looking at an object. You can click a button and you can go to research mode and you can go straight to CatalogIt and you can get all the CatalogIt information. So if you're using it for research purposes, it's very easy to just jump from one layer or another. Even though they're different platforms, they work together like a layer.
Yeah, I mean, just add a little bit more to that. So CatalogIt is the system that McFaddin-Ward is using to document all the stuff in the house, and it's not all included in the tour. There's some, there's things that are in drawers. There's other things that haven't yet made it up. So it's the system that's documenting, and it's at the base, CatalogIt is the system for keeping track of all the things that are in the house. But one of the things that's really important for us is that you not only now you've documented these things, but now you want to use them. You want to make them, available and share them out with the public. So that's what the APIs that Todd mentioned. So that's the ability for him to use to extract things out of CatalogIt for display in this other system, in the system that he developed, Visitor.
Okay, we have 3 more questions, and they are a little bit more specific. The first goes back to talking about development and the development cost. When you were talking about that, did that include the 360-degree technology?
For the McFaddin-Ward House, yes. When we proposed this project, we knew straight out of the gate that it was going to have 360-degree photography. So we handled that for them. You can bring any 360-degree photography, any panoramic images to the system. You just have to process them for the touch points for the objects, and you can utilize it in the system. It can even use Google Maps, and Google Places often has 360 imaging and stuff along those lines. There are people out there that have Matterport cameras. They might do things along the lines of the real estate 360 photos and mapping of a facility. You could use that, things along those lines. But when you buy the license, so remember, McFaddin-Ward was the groundbreaking initial development of this software. So now we're talking about people utilizing licenses of the same thing. So when we price it now, it is assuming that you will bring your own 360 photography to it. And we can help integrate if we need to. But there are tons of people out there that do 360 photography, very high quality 360 photography. So yeah.
The next question is about the language conversion. Is that automatic in the platform, or is that something that's done manually?
Okay, so it's done manually for the most effective translation, because if anybody has used Google Translate, you know that it's pretty good, but it's not perfect. However, with that being said, you can use Google Translate to link off of your home server where your system is and link to Google Translate and go from there. So there are a couple of ways that you can do that. But we recommend just cloning tours and stops and objects and just getting in there and translating that. I mean, not everybody knows how to do it. You need somebody that speaks Spanish, writes Spanish, French, German, whatever it needs to be. But that really is the best way to do it. But the system is so open that it's very easy for you to make clones of tours and have a English version and a Spanish version and a French version along those lines.
And then this next question is, what system is the house's McFaddin-Ward's website hosted on?
Currently, it is using a host such as WP Engine. Their front end website is WordPress. And inside their front end WordPress site, they have a subdirectory /tour, which is where the visitor system lives. That was part of the initial mandate from the director, where he wanted to kind of feel like he was in control of all that. It makes it a lot easier for people when they come to your site, and it doesn't have to change domains. A lot of times visitors will kind of get a weird feeling when you go to the site in question, and then to jump off somewhere else, it goes to a different domain. Some people see it as a security issue or whatever, be that as it may or may not be, but some people don't even really notice that that's happening. But that's what we like to do, is we have a client that has their own hosting account, and they have a separate account for their visitor system, and that just kind of spreads their resources out. But one thing that you'll have to keep in mind, of course, is if your front end website goes down, then your tour system will be down. So we will advise, if whatever questions our licensees have prior to starting a project, we will give them the best advice on how to deploy the system.
Awesome. And then this is the last question that we have time for. And again, these wonderful presenters have their information up here if you have any further questions after this. But is there a limit of touch points in Visitor or any other challenges faced when you utilize the tour for outdoor or no wall spaces?
So for McFaddin-Ward House, we used a software called Pano2VR, and what it does is it takes that flat panoramic image that you saw in the presentation, that kind of crazy curly image, and it brings it in and it lets you scroll around and look in 360 degrees panoramic interactivity. And in that software is where we define the touch points. Now, McFaddin-Ward asked for a true virtual tour with 360 photography, but you don't have to use Visitor that way. We have a mode that we call detail mode, and it has no 360 photography. You have one main image for a room. So for example, McFaddin-Ward, you would walk in the entrance hall, you would have one main image for the entrance hall, and then it lists all the objects in order, or the tasks. And that's where the changing the order of the objects comes in. So you don't have to use it with 360, but it does have that capability. So like I said, we use Pano2VR to process those 360 images. And in that, there are no limits to how many touch points that you can use. But feel free to reach out if you've got an idea for a project. We will advise and consult, no charge, just to see the best way to get this system working for you. And hopefully you'll have CatalogIt ready to go, and we just wrap it all up.
Perfect. And we will send out this recording along with these slides so you have all of their information. And just a big thank you to our presenters today, Todd at PrimeSite Web and/or Visitor.us, Dan with CatalogIt, and the wonderful Victoria at McFaddin-Ward House Museum. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our presenters for sharing. Stay tuned for an email with all of this information as follow-up. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you to Tam.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.